Good evening. Welcome to our June 4th virtual work session. Happy to have you guys here. I'd like to call the meeting to order. And we will, as usual, take our roll call so everyone knows, recording for the minutes, who is in attendance. And I'll start with our council members. In Ward 1, Drew. I think you're muted, but I think you said here.
Yeah.
Okay. Ms. Wilson.
Here.
Ward 2, Mr. Tolan.
Here.
Ward 3, Mr. Estes.
Here.
And Ms. Smith.
Here.
Thank you. And join us from the city staff, we have our city manager, Billy Peppers.
I'm here.
Assistant City Manager, Nathan Ingram.
Good evening, Mayor and Council.
Good evening. Our city clerk, Annie Fortner.
I'm here.
Chief of Police, Chief Merrifield.
I'm here, and good evening.
Thank you. Our Finance Director, Melissa Fortner.
I'm here.
And our Development and Service Manager, Bethany Watson.
I'm here.
And our City Attorney, Bobby Dyer.
I'm here and unmuted.
Okay, awesome. Anyone else from the city? Did I miss anyone?
We also have Mike Morgan with us tonight.
And Mike Morgan, who's always with us and keeping us hopefully connected and flowing for our citizens. And I'd like to welcome all of our citizens following us online on the live stream. Always appreciate you joining us. So I would like to, again, welcome you all to our June 4th work session and live stream. And we certainly are hoping that the state of emergency will be lifted when the current extension is over on June 12th. And we'll be able to return to council chambers and see each other in person, maybe 6 feet apart still, but it would be nice to be back in the same room together. But I want to begin tonight, if you indulge me, with just acknowledging the kind of unprecedented circumstances we find ourselves in tonight at this time, kind of following 2 months of a global pandemic and its ongoing impact on our daily lives. And then, our nation's been dealt another tragic setback with the deaths of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and many others. I think we can all agree that spring 2020 has left us feeling vulnerable and wondering, quite frankly, what comes next. But for me, it's been a struggle really to find the right words to express my own emotions over the past couple of months, because most times I just feel they're inadequate. But with that in mind, I would like to ask those of you on the call tonight and those following online to join me in a 30-second moment of silence for those in our community that are hurting from injustice, loss, fear, loneliness, sickness, and anger. Please join me. Thank you, and may we continue to listen, to understand, and act with kindness. This time, I will entertain a motion, a consideration to approve the agenda. Are there any additions or changes to the agenda tonight?
Mr. Mayor, we need to add an executive session for real estate litigation, please.
Okay. We'll add an executive session for real estate and litigation. Any other changes? Not entertain a motion to approve the agenda with the addition.
I make a motion to approve with the as amended.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
I second.
Okay. Motion by Mr. Estes, a second by Ms. Wilson. All in favor, Ms. McGrew, how do you vote?
Yes.
Ms. Wilson?
Yes.
Mr. Tolan?
Yes.
Mr. Estes?
Yes.
And Ms. Schmidt?
Yes.
All members voted to approve the agenda as amended. Tonight, we do have a guest with us tonight, and we're happy to have Mr. Clay Pilgrim with our accounting firm, Rushton, with a presentation of our fiscal year 2019 comprehensive financial report, our CAFR. So, Mr. Pilgrim, thank you for joining us online, and we're going to turn it over to you, and so you can give us all the good news on our audit. So.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Council, for having me, having us as Rushton and Company back to do your audit for fiscal year 19. Can you all hear me good?
Yes.
Okay, good deal. Probably don't want to see me too much, but as long as you can hear me, that'll be fine. I know we're all in unprecedented times here, and y'all got a lot on your agenda tonight, so I'm going to be as quick as I can be, but certainly don't think my brevity, my briefness is. I want to make sure I'll give you plenty of time. So if y'all do have questions, even if it's after I finish tonight, do feel free to reach out to me. I'm here anytime to assist in any way possible. So please, I'm usually a lot more thorough as we go through, as some of you are aware in the presentation, but I'm gonna try to somewhat quickly move through. So I'm going to share my screen now with my presentation. Okay, are you all seeing my screen now?
Yep.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Okay, so I'm going to move through this presentation, and then I've got another letter and a few other things to speak on as well once I conclude. So the first slide here in front of you, page 2 of the report of the presentation here, is about our independent auditors report. Of course, we are your independent auditors, and we are charged to give an opinion, opine upon the financial statements, whether they are materially misstated or to confirm that they are presented fairly in all material respects. So we do follow government auditing standards in our audit process. And of course, those financial statements are the responsibility of the City of Canton's management. I am pleased to present for fiscal year 19, we do have an unmodified or clean opinion on the financial statements for the fiscal year ended September 30, 2019. So nothing came to our attention during the audit that would prohibit us from issuing an unmodified opinion. That opinion letter, if you're flipping later, is on pages 1 and 2 of the bound audit report that you all will have once we're able to get together in person. And you've probably seen an electronic copy thus far. All right, in the bound report, there are only 2 statements in the entire report that bring all of the activities of the city together in one, and that's the statement of net position, which is on pages 12 and 13, and the statement of activities on page 14. The statement of net position is going to be similar to a balance sheet, and the statement of activities similar to an income statement for like a non-governmental business enterprise. And so these are the only 2 statements that bring your general fund, your SPLOST fund, all of your special revenue funds, and then also your water and sewer fund and your business type activities all together in one. So a few numbers from those statements. You see on your screen there, you got 5 fiscal years comparison there. I'm going to focus mostly on 2019, but I do have the other 4 years there for comparison's sake. So this is net position or equity of the city. It's broken down into 3 categories as required. The first category, net investment and capital assets, is going to be your capital assets, less the accumulated depreciation on those assets, less any debt utilized to acquire those assets, of 122, 104, 662. Your restricted net position, this is going to be SPLOST funds you're holding or other funds that are restricted from outside sources, of 5,104,253. Unrestricted net position of 23,727,482. And that gets you to your total net position of 150,936,397. For the year, there was an increase in net position of 9,669,229, which was somewhat similar to the increase in the prior year. And those variances from year to year over those 5-year periods there is mostly due to increases in or decreases, I guess, in any given year in consumption or demand-related revenues, such as charges for services like water charges, and then like sales tax revenues. Of course, those are based on sales. So. All right, moving on to the general fund. I know you all spend a lot of time throughout the year looking at your general fund, so we'll spend a little time here with it. For fiscal year 19, revenues of the general fund increased 1,100,213, or about 7.9%. Attributing to that increase, property tax revenues were up about 295,000. Franchise tax revenues were up about 348,000. Your insurance premium tax revenues were up 120,000. Building permits increased $207,000, and municipal court fines and forfeitures increased $189,000. On the expenditure side, your expenditures increased $424,123, or about 2.9%. In total, police expenditures increased $325,000, due mostly to personal and contract services. Fire expenditures increased $301,000 due to some payments to others. That's your contract there on fire. Economic development expenditures decreased $78,000. On the as far as your residual fund balance, your unassigned fund balance is a number that I think you all look at and we look at each year. Of course, a lot of people use this, or a lot of governments use this unassigned fund balance to kind of tell them to look at reserve. If you listen to GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association, they calculate the reserve, so to speak, using unrestricted fund balance. But really, when you're looking at unassigned fund balance, about 2 to 3 months, they say, is a healthy reserve. And so, as you see there, fiscal year 19, $4,497,666. That's about 30.2% of your annual expenditures, or about 3.6 months. So kind of what that's saying, it's not perfect, not exact science or perfect in any stretch of the imagination, but it is basically saying if we were to have no revenues coming in, we could operate about 3.6 months on our unassigned fund balance in the general fund. Comparing that to the prior year, there's a lot of factors that move into this, and the classification of fund balance. You'll see there in the prior year, it was only $118,000, but that was due to there was an advance to the SPLOST 7 fund that was required to be classified as non-spendable fund balance. So if you back that out, it was about $3.8 million, which is about 3.1 months. So it has increased some from the prior year, but I would say that is a healthy fund balance there in the general fund for sure. The next slide here is just a kind of a chart depiction of those of the revenues and expenditures for the last 3 fiscal years. You'll see there on fiscal year 19, your revenue and expenditure numbers real similar. The next slide here is going to be a graphical depiction here of the fund balance for the last 3 fiscal years, with the blue line being the total fund balance and the green line being the unassigned fund balance, as we just talked about there, $4,497,666. All right, quickly walk through the water and sewer fund as well here. So on the water and sewer fund, operating revenues increased about $313,000, or about 2%. Of that increase, the largest part of that, of course, was your water fees. They increased $381,689. Sewer fees actually decreased about $54,000 for the year. On the expense side, operating expenses increased $410,796. Largest part of that increase was on the cost of sales and services side, $379,636, and depreciation expense, which I talked about earlier on your capital assets in the water fund, increased $31,160. Interest expense comparison there from 18 to 19, you see went from $227,608 to $210,119 as those notes and bonds are paid down there in the water and sewer fund. Your unrestricted net position, which is similar to the fund balance, but the water and sewer fund here is a different type of fund. So this is the unrestricted equity of the water and sewer fund. Fiscal year 19, $17,363,890 versus $13,700,714 for fiscal year 18. All right, I have a chart here for you showing your operating revenues and operating expenses, and then that dark blue line in the center there is your operating income. So that's your net operating income from your operating revenues over your operating expenses for fiscal year 19, $8,522,309. Okay. So in the report, we also are required by government auditing standards to assess the internal controls and compliance of the city. And pleased to present, we had no material weaknesses in the controls of the city. We did have 2 significant deficiencies. However, both of those we have talked about at length over the last year or 2. And I think I know Nathan, Melissa, and I have all discussed, and we feel like we're making progress and probably can eliminate both of those findings. Not to get into extreme detail here, because I know we're trying to be somewhat quick here, but those are we see those with a lot of governments, especially of the city of Canton size, related to segregation of duties. However, over time, we've kind of worked with city staff, and we feel like we're real close to removing that finding, so to speak, likely in the next year. There were no material noncompliance items noted during our testing. I want to quickly walk through with you. I know I've got a few council members on that are new here this year, so they haven't heard my riveting audit presentation, but wanted to mention to you all kind of our process. So we're required by state of Georgia law, or the city is required by state of Georgia law, of course, to have an audit, an independent audit. So you all hired us to perform that audit. We submit this audit report each year. The city actually submits to the Government Finance Officers Association to obtain the Certificate of Achievement in Financial Reporting, which the city has obtained. I could look back, I don't know how many years in a row, but quite a few years in a row from the GFOA. The report is also required to be submitted to the State of Georgia Department of Audits and Accounts, and that has to be submitted within 6 months of fiscal year end. So even though we're presenting here on June 4th, I want to make sure you all are aware this report was submitted in March on time to the Georgia Department of Audits. Matter of fact, we have actually already received back the comments from the Georgia Department of Audits and had 0 comments, not even any suggestions for improvements for next year. A lot of times they'll have at least something. I guess we at least think that they're looking at it. But this year there were no. Sometimes they'll make comments that say it needs to be corrected this year, although we like not to have those ever. And then sometimes they'll have comments that say we'll need changes made on future reports. But we have no comments at all this year, so that was a clean report for this year. As you all know, we're required to follow GASB, or Governmental Accounting Standards Board, as far as the city's accounting is concerned. There were a couple of new standards that were implemented over the last several years, but one was implemented this year that was somewhat substantial, but not as big as some we've got coming. And that was GASB Statement 88, which is certain disclosures related to debt, including direct borrowings and direct placements. The largest part of this one was basically was disclosure related. It didn't really change the numbers as much as it changed the disclosures and the notes of the financial statements. So we had to break out what was directly with the financial institutions or directly with bondholders. So those have to be disclosed separately from, so like a private placement bond now has to be disclosed separately from a public or not private bond. The same goes for notes. If you have which most all notes are from direct borrowings, but we have to disclose those separately now. And there's also some additional disclosures required on the debt as well. There was also a requirement from the uniform guidance. I should have mentioned that a moment ago. So I mentioned our report on internal control. In some years, when the city expends more than $750,000 of federal funds, and that's based on expenditures, not revenues, not receipts, it's based on what's spent in any given fiscal year, we are also required in that case to perform a single audit, which is an additional compliance audit on those federal dollars. For fiscal year 19, the city did not expend more than $750,000, so we did not have to perform that additional audit. But there was a new procurement standards that was required by the uniform guidance, which is who sets the standards for those compliance audits. And so I mentioned this one to you. I actually mentioned 88 and this one to you last year. This was coming, but this one was not because the city has pretty substantial procurement standards and a good set of standards in place. There were no real significant implementation requirements regarding this standard. I'll quickly run through two reporting changes that are going to be future. We try to be proactive with you all to let you know what's coming. We do have two pretty substantial, or one really substantial new standard, and one that's not extremely substantial, but will have an effect on your municipal court, which was previously called an agency fund. Will now change. That will now be called a custodial fund, and the accounting for that will be a little different. There's an additional statement required in your financial report. That one will be required to be implemented in the fiscal year 2021. It would have been fiscal year 2020, but with COVID-19, GASB issued GASB statement number 95, which postponed about 10 or 12 different standards. This was one of them. It postponed this one for 1 year. So it will now be effective for fiscal year end 2021. We've already actually assisted a couple of governments that were, or December governments that were required to implement this, that we've, of course, before it was postponed. So we're very familiar with this, and we'll assist the city in implementing this one as we are required. GASB Statement 87, this is the substantial one. This changes the way we account for leases. I've been talking about this one with you all actually for probably 2 or 3 years. This one was actually postponed because it's so substantial. They postponed it 18 months instead of 1 year. So it was originally going to be required. I think this one was actually going to be, even though it's a 15-month, I'm sorry, 18-month postponement, because of the fiscal year of the city, it actually only extended it for 1 more year for you all. So it is now required to be implemented in fiscal year 2022, which is good because this one is going to be substantial in the changes as far as how we account for leases in the financial report. That concludes my presentation on the numbers. I do have a letter I wanted to discuss with you all, but I wanted to, I guess I could stop now and entertain any questions you all have.
Thank you, Mr. Pilgrim. I had one question on the revenues on the water fund. The fee increase of 6.4%. And this may be for Mr. Ingram or Ms. Forster, but is that attributed to new customers or growth in the system?
So let me actually, something I have with me here. Now, Mr. Ingram or Ms. Forster may be able to answer that quicker than I can. However, one advantage to being here remotely that I'm on my laptop, and I would have documented in my file here, which I have open, why that is. Now, Mr. Ingram or Ms. Forster, y'all may want to chime in.
A big part of that is, Mayor, was new development.
Thank you. I just, for any of our citizens following online, I didn't want them to get the impression that water rates have increased.
No, sir, not this year. Yeah.
So it was new, yeah, and I have that documented here as well. It was new development.
Right. Great. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Well, along those same lines, we had a decrease in the sewer fees. What would constitute that?
I have to take a little bit closer look at that to verify that, you know, what that was. That could have been some I don't know. It could be some refunds issued. I don't know if we issued any sewer credits, something like that. But we can find out and get back with council with the answer to that.
I'd like to comment that some of that decrease in the sewer funds is when customers are converting to irrigation meters. So they're no longer charged sewer on their water.
So that could be one of the reasons they decrease, Melissa?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
They're still consuming the water, but we're no longer charging the sewer.
Oh, okay.
And I also believe that we had a credit at the very end of calendar year 2018, fiscal year 19 for Canton Exchange when they annexed into the city. I believe there was a TAP credit that was involved there as well.
I believe that was like $500,000 or more. Was it? I mean, I know it's substantial. That's what I was thinking of that. If it's 0.5% decrease, it could explain
I don't think it was that high, but that's probably the largest number in that pot. Yes, sir.
I remember it was too high, but
Yeah, once again, we'll be more than happy to get an exact answer back to council as soon as we can.
Another portion of that decrease is the loss of sewer revenues from the city of Ball Ground.
Right. All right.
okay.
Well, that's good enough for me. Nathan, you don't have to look up something else. That all makes sense to me.
Any other questions for Mr. Pilgrim? Okay.
All right. Before I move on, I want to finish up on the audit and also thank you all, and also the entire all your department heads and all your staff that made the just like those questions there, for example, really got on and answered those questions. I don't have that with a lot of my cities and counties that I work with. So that's a testament to the finance team you have there, Mr. Peppers, and all your department heads, and even down to every single employee. Very helpful when we go, whether it's we're visiting the water and sewer plant, or we're in the finance office, or wherever we're at. It's the police department, municipal court. It's always a lot of assistance, and so I would be remiss if I didn't mention that before I concluded. So we're very appreciative of that. And council has you all have a great team in place.
Thank you. We're very proud of it.
All right. I'm going to share my screen one more time to pull up a letter. We are at the end. I think you all wanted me to discuss this. We're at the end of the 3-year period on our contract for audit services. And I have put together a letter here talking about a little bit of what I've just explained to you all about our process and how we, there are several standards coming that are going to be substantial that will require additional work on our part and on the part of the city. But while we do have a small, really more of a cost of living type increase here to extend this contract. We did not substantially increase this for those several new standards. Now, those are 2 of about 10 or 12 that are going to be required to be implemented, but they are the 2 most substantial. But I did want to present this to you all, and also mention that as a firm, we are pretty strict and firm on our fees. So if we give you an all-inclusive fee, that is a not to exceed. And we stand behind the fact that we have not increased our, gone up on our fee or gone over our fee, I guess I should say. Back-end billing is what I call it. We're big on no back-end billing and try to provide as good a service as possible. In other words, no billing of the phone calls or assistance we provide throughout the audit process and really throughout the year. As I mentioned earlier, please do reach out to us throughout the year. But I have this letter here. I think you all may have seen this letter already. And obviously, if you need time to look through it as well, this is a letter I've provided here.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Pilgrim. We appreciate your services and your good report. And again, we appreciate our team, Mr. Ingram and Ms. Forrester, and again, our department heads, and very proud, and Mr. Peppers, of course, very proud of our clean audit. And I think, again, as I've been sitting through calls with mayors around the country and hearing of the financial woes they're having, which is understandable in the past couple of months, I'm very proud of the position we're in and our financial management team. We owe them a lot of gratitude. So we appreciate you, and appreciate you, Mr. Pilgrim, and your team for your great audit. So,
well, thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Okay. So we'll proceed into our council agenda with you have in your packet the draft minutes from the meeting from May 21st. Are there any changes or questions to those minutes?
Move to approve.
Okay. A motion to approve by Ms. Wilson. A second.
This is Brooke. I'll second.
Second by Ms. Schmidt. Any other questions, comments? All in favor, say A.
A.
Aye. Ms. McGrew?
Yes.
Ms. Wilson?
A.
Mr. Toland?
A.
Okay. Mr. Estes?
Yes.
And Ms. Schmidt?
Yes.
Thank you. All members voted to approve the minutes. Okay. So going on to, we have informational items. We have in your packet the review of the April financials, and we have Ms. Forrester join us on the call tonight. This is really for information only, but she is available if you have any questions about the April financials.
Mr. Mayor, this is Nick. I just had one quick question. The tax on the general fund revenues, the taxes, that's as incurred, right? That's recognized like on a cash basis. So we collect our cash our taxes in November, December time period. So that would be it's not spread over the year. Is that correct?
I'm actually still. This is Clay. I'm actually still on here. I can help on this if need be, or Mr. Ingram. I don't want to steal your thunder, so to speak, but no, there is a receivable that's recorded in the general fund for those taxes as well. So in other words, if however any taxes that are not received within 60 days after year end are deferred. Without getting too accounting on here, but we have to record any. So we record the receivable. It's actually for 7 years worth of taxes. So the prior 7 digests is recorded as receivable. So but any of those taxes that are not received within 60 days after fiscal year end are deferred.
Okay. And I guess my question is intra-year, though. You know, the way I look at the budgets as presented during the meetings is, you know, we're 7/12 of the way through, so 58%ish. And so I kind of peruse through and see, you know, where we're at. You know, so if expenditures are below that means that's positive. And then we're at 96% of our budget for taxes, and that's kind of what drew that question there.
Those, if I may, Mr. Estes, those financials are prepared on a modified accrual basis of accounting, which means yes, we will get 75% of our tax revenue through the months of November, December into January. So that may be the reason that you're seeing what you're seeing.
Okay, that confirms it. Thank you.
Yes, I apologize. I see what you're saying now. So yes, you would receive the largest part of your taxes there near the beginning of your fiscal year, and it would slowly trickle in by, like you said, by cash, the cash you receive throughout the year. So.
Understood. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
If you'd like a few dates on some of those taxes, remember that our property taxes are due in mid-November, and those are in conjunction with the county. And then by January, we start receiving all of our franchise fees from our utilities. And then March 31st, all of our business licenses are due. So those are some of our largest revenue sources.
And then as we give back the occupational tax, that'll be a reduction or a credit to this account?
Yes.
Correct, or a contra revenue.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
And I would just mention too that that's one of the benefits we have with having an October 1 start to our fiscal year. Governments that have a July 1 start get the bulk of their funds in the middle of their fiscal year. And so right now they're trying to put budgets together and not knowing where dollars and cents are coming in. And so having personally worked for a local government that did that, having worked for the state that did that, it's so much easier from the budget standpoint when you know that the largest chunk of your budget is coming in at the beginning of your fiscal year. So that October 1 fiscal year, while it may be confusing to the public to have a different fiscal year, is really great for our financials.
Yes, sir. This is Clay again. I apologize, but I wanted to mention what Mr. Peppers just mentioned there. I have a county who has quite a few counties who have a June 30 fiscal year, but I have one county in particular that I had to go before the board. It's been 6 months or so ago about potentially switching their fiscal year due to the frustration with exactly what Mr. Peppers just mentioned, trying to set the budget before they really have their digest and everything resolved for the year to know what that tax base is going to look like, what those tax revenues are going to look like. So.
Great. Any other questions on the April financials? Okay. While we're on informational items, with everything that's going on, we've asked Chief Merrifield to join us we don't have the pleasure of having him in the meeting with us physically, which we always enjoy getting his report and all. But I know I've had a lot of questions. I know many of you have had questions about protests and other things. Mainly, I wanted to thank Chief Merrifield for his leadership and thank all of our police department for the great work that they do, their integrity. We're proud to have great police department here and the most amazing community outreach. And we appreciate you guys. But I just want to give you a chance to have any observations or anything you're hearing or seeing, or give council a chance to ask any questions. But if Chief Merrifield, could you give us a brief update on things from your perspective?
Yes, Mayor, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak with y'all. I know that May 26th was the first time I saw the video at night at home, and I've shared with several of you that it was difficult to even sleep that night. So May 27th, and I know I put a memorandum out that all of you have read. I'm not gonna rehash. But I put a memorandum out to our department for some things that needed to be not addressed, that needed to be recognized. Not addressed because our officers don't act in that manner. And I don't just say that. I've got 5 years of documentation to show that our officers don't act that way. But it still has to be addressed. I will say that, and I have said this from the beginning, that this starts with leadership. This starts with accountability of police management, no matter which department we're talking about. If you look at the situation in Minneapolis, if you look at the situation down in South Georgia, that's management and that's leadership. Leadership has to set standards, and there has to be accountability. And this is Steve Merrifield's opinion, and it was my opinion the night I watched it, my gut opinion. First of all, what environment is in a department where 4 people can think that this is okay? Secondly, what environment is in a department when officers know they're being videotaped? They're being told you're being videotaped, and it doesn't seem to bother them, which to me equals nobody above us is going to care. And then finally, and I've heard several veteran officers and I talk about this, and it's a little bitty thing. You have to be in this business a while to get it. But when they loaded Mr. Floyd into that ambulance, the body language of those officers, and at that point, they had been told, we can't find a pulse. The body language of those officers wasn't concerned. It wasn't worried. There was no dropping of heads. There was no, what has gone wrong here? And to me, that again transmits into nobody's going to care above us. Now, that's my opinion. And that's a management issue. That's a leadership issue. As leaders, as management, we have to set a standard. We have to create a culture. We have to create an environment. And the 2 important things on that is there has to be rewards. There has to be rewards for doing the right thing. And I think we do a good job of that. Just last week on Facebook Live, we gave Officer Solace the Life-Saving Award. And those are the major things we give as rewards. We give a lot of documentation for officers who do the right thing. Just as importantly, there has to be consequences for not doing the right thing. Yeah. And those consequences can be, depending on the infraction, from a reprimand to termination. But there has to be consequences that not only the individual employee knows, but the department knows. That's the only way you're going to establish accountability. And that's an unpleasant part of it. But I will tell you this, and I've heard managers say, well, I never liked that part of it. I don't lose a minute's sleep over that part of it. That's if we have a person who does not need to be carrying a badge and gun, I do not lose a sleep over taking that gun and badge away from that person. So I would say that accountability is a huge thing. During the Facebook Live, I would like to talk about some of the things, Monday, that we do here. Some of y'all, all of y'all pretty much know a lot of the things that we do here. There's some little things that you may not know that we do here when it comes to force and how we deal with situations and how we review situations. I will tell you that just kind of a tidbit, in 2019, we made 1,033 arrests, the City of Canton Police Department. We had 20 use of force incidents. I think that comes out to 0.02% use of force in 1,033 arrests. We had 24,000 calls for service, and we had 20 uses of force. And when you do that, it comes out to more decimals than I have to look up to figure out what that decimal point means. But it's 0.0008% of force. I will tell you, just like anybody would tell you, I wish we lived in a world where we didn't have one use of force. But that's not the world we live in. But I think those numbers show the restraint that our officers use. And when you talk about use of force, how use of forces is reported by different departments varies. In the City of Canton, anything other than the person complying, turning around, putting their hands behind them, and you put the handcuffs on them, anything pretty much other than that, if we have to put our hands on them, that's a use of force. Whether there's any injury or not, well, that is a reported use of force. And in that 20 uses of force that I discussed earlier, we had one of those where the person did have to go to the hospital. And that, quite honestly, is because they got in, our officer was struggling with them inside of a restaurant, and they both, the officer and the suspect, fell, and the suspect's head hit a table going down, and he had to have a few stitches at the hospital. So that's the only one out of the 20 that we had to do that. So again, I would love to go without using force. I would also say that in 2019, we did not have a single use of force complaint made against our officers. Not a citizen's complaint, not an internal affairs investigation. Our officers are working as hard as they can to do the right thing. And in a world where decisions have to be made very quickly and you have to watch out for yourself, that, by the way, does not apply to the Minneapolis situation. That was not a situation that a split-second decision had to be made, and where, from my observations, any officer's life was in danger. But our officers do face that, just like all officers do. And so in that environment, I think our officers are very well restrained and very well trained. And I mentioned to some, and in my memo, we're trained on excited delirium. Excited delirium is a condition. I can't give you the medical behind it, but it is a chemical condition that happens inside some suspects, sometimes due to drugs, sometimes just due to overexertion in a struggle. And they have difficulties breathing, getting blood, and getting oxygen. We're trained on that. We know that. I find it hard to believe the Minneapolis officers weren't trained on that. It's been around for years. That's not something new. And there's telltale signs of excited delirium. People, because their body temperatures go up. So they will tell you, I'm burning up, I'm hot, I need water, I can't breathe. I can't breathe, I'm burning up. We know when we hear those things, what is going on. And we are trained, we have to get those people sitting up where they can get some medical attention to them. So we train on, and we will continue training and emphasizing those things. One of the things too that I really appreciate as I said, I put an email out at 9 o'clock the next morning, that morning after I saw it, at 9 o'clock in the morning, saying, do this, watch the videos, go over it, talk about the red flags that occurred out there, talk about why police officers would watch that happen and not stop that from happening. And I put that at 9 o'clock in the morning. The shift that had come on that day came on at 6 in the morning. The sergeant from that shift sent me an email and said, that's the first thing we discussed when we came in this morning, because I watched that video last night and I am sick at my stomach. That's the kind of thing a chief of police wants to hear. He wants to hear his supervisor say that, because I know if that sergeant feels that way, I know his officers feel that way. And that's I would expect no less. So there's a litany of things that we did right before this, and we will continue to do right, and certainly understand the hurt that is out there. We have officers here that are minority, and they have to try and deal with this also. We understand that and support that. And there's a great deal of hurt to go around, and we certainly understand that. Mr. Mayor, I think that in a nutshell is what I'd like to say to you.
Thank you, Chief. I don't think we could ask for anything more. So just know we appreciate you. I appreciate your honesty, your integrity, and your candor most of all. I mean, I think there's no dancing around what you're talking about. I know the council appreciates you. I want our citizens to know how great our police department is and how much you do care. And I want our police force to know that we care and appreciate them. But I appreciate you so much, and I know the council does as well. So,
well, thank you, sir, and thank you all for your support, and thank our community for the support.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Moving on. Our council has to follow that. So, as I've said, the past few meetings is that we have had a lot going on during this pandemic and everything else, but our council has been working, tirelessly on their committees, and our roadmap for Canton to move Canton forward is still ongoing, more important than ever. And we had in our retreat earlier in the year, had decided that on a quarterly basis, we would have the committees report back. I think 2 committees every work session. Of course, our work sessions got someone else has something in mind for those. So I just wanted to kind of give our committees, we will get back on that schedule as soon as we're back in the auditorium. But I did want to give our committees just a brief opportunity to kind of catch the public up on what some of the things they've been doing, not all of the things, because I know we've all been busy and with a lot of exciting things, but a lot of hard work too. But I just want to kind of give our committees who have, I think they all have things to share, but I think there are a few that have some updates that they'd like to share tonight. And we want to start with our Economic Development Committee updates with Councilmember Ms. Schmidt.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So I have a list of ideas that we had from the beginning before the pandemic sort of happened that we're still working on. And some of those just include forming a small business advisory team that might report back to council on a quarterly basis with ideas, trends, local updates, things that they're seeing in the city. We talked about doing like free resource classes specifically here in Canton. Finding more ways to work with the Cherokee Office of Economic Development, specifically on technology and infrastructure ideas. And there's other things too. I won't list every single thing. But some things that we have already been able to do some things because of the pandemic and some things in spite of the pandemic. And a few things we've talked about in meetings already, but just to go over it with anybody who's following along. We're going to put the Canton's Guide to Opening a Business. We're updating that with city staff, and we're going to get that online before the end of the month. And that sort of just makes it easier for people to find out what they need to do to open a business here in Canton, and sort of streamlines the process for how to get questions answered and all that. We put up a business resource page specifically for our businesses during the COVID crisis. We just did the License to Recovery program, which waives or refunds the occupational license fees. We're going to talk about making the packaged beer and wine sales from restaurants permanent. We are still looking at parking solutions in downtown Canton. We are running with our first public art installation, which is going to be an art mural along the cement wall that runs down Railroad Street. We're still talking about the best ways to use our SPLOST economic development funds. So, and then we have a big wish list too, which would include public restrooms downtown, someday having a Canton Visitor Center, and bringing in more light industrial and more new collar positions, which if you're not young, you might wonder, what is a new collar position? I had to Google it. But things like IT and computer and software and stuff that I'm not very good at, but I want those people to want to come to Canton and work. So there's a whole lot more. And if anybody has questions, I'd love to answer emails or have phone conversations with residents or business owners and just all work together as a team. I think building our civic infrastructure, how we build our community, how we build our connections, that affects our economic development. And that's what we want to focus on.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Schmidt. Appreciate your hard work. Mr. Tilden, I think, is going to give us an update on the Housing Committee work.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. As most of you know, we had a housing forum that was scheduled for March the 12th, unfortunately canceled due to COVID-19. But prior to the cancellation, we did hold a kickoff meeting. So the wheels are turning, but they've been paused temporarily. That was on January the 30th. So we got together to discuss the framework. We got folks together such as city officials, Cherokee County, banking, real estate, developers, Cherokee Family Violence Center, Canton Housing Authority, Cherokee County Senior Services, and Must Ministries. Those discussions will continue. We're probably going to do a different type event for that particular forum coming up at some point in the future to be announced. At the same time, Canton is in the middle of a broader housing study. It's being conducted by Thomas P. Miller and Associates. Mr. Patton is leading that effort, and he's essentially providing the firm with information to help with the study. We've had multiple meetings, I think 3 meetings now with the team, Mr. Patton, the mayor, myself, and others, and that's come along very nicely. The next step is for the Miller team to physically come to Canton, and we met with them this week, and it was decided that they would be on site June 24th, 25th, and 26th. And on the 25th, which is on a Thursday, we're in the process of putting together a public input session, which is going to be pretty creative. It'll also be designed to be very safe with social distancing. So those details are being worked on as I speak. So that's very exciting. It's designed to get public input in terms of the types of housing that Canton citizens want, the different types of housing that we've identified, some creative solutions around the country that not everybody's aware of. So it'll be a very exciting time for an interaction of information between the city, all the stakeholders, and the citizens. And the last thing is an initiative is underway to revitalize certain areas of Canton that are in need. And this is very exciting. Included in the discussions is a possible development that would tie the Mill at Etowah with downtown. And that has been an ongoing discussion for months now. And And we actually had a meeting today, which was very, very productive. So more on that as information comes in and as we have it to share with folks. So as the mayor has indicated, we did have the working session in Rome a few months ago. We are in development with the team for a city roadmap. Once that's completed, it'll serve as a framework for the city to share up front with potential developers. So anybody that wishes to apply for various projects, if those projects fit within the framework of the roadmap, we'll have a discussion with the mayor and council. If they don't, then the applicants will be instructed to either make an adjustment or we'll be unable to work with them. So a lot of exciting things going on in terms of housing. We've not been sitting on our hands, and lots of good stuff coming. The next thing, of course, is the meeting on the 25th, which I'm sure Mr. Peppers and staff is going to be disseminating information about.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Tolan. Appreciate that update. Next, Roads and Transportation Committee, Mayor Pro Tem, Ms. Wilson.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. I think you all remember that Jeff Lewis, our DOT rep, was to be with us before we all had to shut down. I've been in touch with Jeff. He's ready to come back when we're ready to have him. So we'll be rescheduling that. I want to be sure the public knows about it because I'm sure they have lots of questions about transportation to ask Mr. Lewis. I have a couple of updates that Bethany Watson works so closely with DOT, and we're fortunate to have her as our voice with DOT. And I have a couple of updates from Bethany that you'll be interested in. The third lane on exit 19A off 575 should begin work within the next couple of weeks, and work will be completed soon after. I don't know. I went over there to see this because I wanted to see exactly what's going on. There's going to be a lane that will be a dedicated turn lane as you come off 575. I'm talking with my hands. As you come off 575, that will go all the way around and connect with Northside Cherokee Boulevard, so that ambulances or police officers, whoever, use that or don't get backed up on that exit at 19A. So DOT is going to put in that third dedicated lane that will start as you come off 575. Now it starts way up and they get backed up there. So we'll be looking forward, according to Bethany, DOT said it should begin within the next couple of weeks. The second thing and the last thing is that the city submitted 2 transportation improvement programs applications for State Route 140. One of them, you remember, is at Riverstone at Marietta Highway, which is the Walgreens, and one is the end of Reinhardt College Parkway. Funding was approved for professional engineering at the Riverstone Marietta Highway near Walgreens. That one, they're going to put ACL and DCL lanes. Remember, this is just the professional engineering that has been approved. Due to the uncertainty with COVID-19, additional funds for this intersection have not been yet approved. But we do expect funding when this project, whenever the funds become available for this project. Obviously, they would not be doing professional engineering if they don't mean to follow through with it. It won't be within the next 6 months, though. It'll be a while. But this is something we've been wanting and looking forward to for a long time. So there is a little work on that. Funding was not approved for the Reinhardt College Parkway 140 intersection. Staff will request funding for this project at the next round of the TIP project solicitation. So we're not giving up. Bethany will be putting in another application for that. Do you have any questions? I think Bethany's here.
Great. Any questions on any of those exciting updates? Okay, thank you. Oh, Drew, I think.
Yes. Did DOT give a reason why the request was denied for the Reinhardt College Parkway 140 intersection?
I assume it's funding. Bethany, is that what you think?
Yes, they had a limited amount of funds and a lot of projects to choose from, and they didn't give specific reasons why the certain projects were not selected, but I definitely could reach out to the ARC and find out that answer for you.
That's okay. If you're going to resubmit, I was just curious if there was a reason given. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. We are excited though about the other one there, the intersection at Walgreens. Probably we all agree that's probably more critical, but hopefully we can see some progress there. So thank
Definitely.
you. Okay, and Community Development Committee update from Councilmember McGrew.
Thank you. Northside Hospital is expected to receive a permit for adding to their bed floors, to add 2 more floors to the bed tower. City's new permitting software is being reconfigured, and it's on target to go live October 1. And the city has been verbally approved by the county for CDBG funds for the Harmon Park improvements. The amount is $127,496. This will go before the commissioners later in June for their formal vote. And Sean stole my thunder about the housing study. Thank you, Sean. Anytime.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So, as you guys can see, we have a lot going on. And again, that's just a highlights of what these committees are working on and the exciting roadmap we're putting together for the future. I don't think, even with all that we've been dealing with on top of the roadmap and things we had planned, I think we're on schedule. Get this roadmap done, and I think we're already seeing some results, and tell you you're going to see a lot more. We're excited about it. I appreciate the hard work of council and the tasks you're taking on with gusto and your energy and excitement. No one's asleep at the wheel, and we're moving forward very productively. So I appreciate it. So we're going to move on to old business. We have one item, item 8A, discussion and possible action on territorial exchange for water service area with the city of West Waleska. City Manager, Mr. Peppers.
Good evening. As you recall, we had conversation a meeting or so back about the request from Waleska for us to look into swapping service territory. Basically, the city taking over the area of Amos Road and Pea Ridge that we currently serve all of the area around. I was able to have a discussion with the staff up in Waleska. I've talked with our staff and also talked with Mayor Lamb up in Waleska. And ultimately, I think if council's willing to, we should propose that we swap territory with them and let them take over the preserve at Canyon Ridge, which is an area that they serve to us through a master meter. So they would be the direct water service provider of that neighborhood. We would continue to service that neighborhood with sewer. We would also swap back with Angel House. If you recall, we took Angel House's water since we were providing sewer. We would submit the water back to Waleska. And then lastly, we would work with them to exchange which meters and registers we can. Their system is a meter and register that they're used to reading, and our system is one that we're used to reading. So if we can change the meters out between Canyon Ridge and the Pea Ridge area, that will save us some money in the long run. My suggestion is that if council is okay with that, that we reach basically an agreement to have it done by a set period of time. I had suggested that perhaps we say January 1, and that gives us some time to move in that direction. I don't necessarily think the date is as concerning from Waleska's standpoint. It's just trying to get that service area resolved. It's a little bit more questionable, at least on their end, because we already have lines that are running through that area. So they have to run their service lines past our service lines to get to these properties. We're already providing the water in that area through our agreement with Waleska to wholesale water to them. So it's not an increased water demand for us. So, you know, after reviewing it with staff, I'm not as worried about the transition over. It doesn't seem to be as problematic if that's what council's desire is to do. And of course, Waleska would like to see us make the territorial swap. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Mr. Estes.
I believe when we were talking, there was an open item around trying to understand the infrastructure that existed there. Any update on that or any concerns?
So a portion of the area is served with PVC line. We're not as concerned with that area just based off the data we have from them on leaks and things like that. It doesn't appear to have any major issues. And we have neighborhoods and areas in part of the city that are on PVC lines. Long term, we'd like to see those lines converted over, but that area is more likely to redevelop before we would go in and put in new lines. There is a small portion of asbestos line that is still existing on the 140 side, but it's much smaller than it used to be because the portion of the line that runs in front of what will be the new apartment complex that's there on 140 was actually replaced by the developer. So it's a very narrow piece of line that's got to be replaced in there. And so from our standpoint, we don't see that as an issue in the long run because it's probably going to be replaced as it relates to new development in that area and would be at the cost of the developer.
Thank you.
Mr. Peppers, you said there have been staff discussions over this transition. Is there a formal staff recommendation to the swap? I mean, is staff in favor of this? Is that comfortable with this?
Yeah, I think Mr. Atavian and I are both in agreement that it's not going to cause any additional troubles for the city, and it probably actually, in the long run, makes more sense for us not to have Alaska trying to serve water in the middle of the city serving water. It gives us more opportunities in the long run for future projects, and ultimately the people who are being served at Amos Road and Pea Ridge are getting water from the city of Canton to begin with. For those residents that are city residents that live in the Preserve at Canyon Ridge, they're kind of in a unique situation because the city is actually the water customer to Waleska. All of the water that goes into that neighborhood flows through a city meter. And so because of that, you know, they're always kind of up in limbo with what's going on with Waleska's system because we can't really answer for Waleska what their system is doing, even though we're the ones billing for the water in that area. So I think in the long run, it's a better solution for everybody. It will not change the city's desire to have a connection at the back of Canyon Ridge to go along with our Laurel Canyon booster pump station, because from our standpoint, it's a good idea for us to have a connection to Waleska's system, both on the east side of 140 and the west side of 140, in case there's ever an issue. It just provides additional backup support for our cell contract.
So for Canyon Ridge residents, it is going to, as you said, it's not going to create any additional problems, but we see it as solving problems for the city potentially. For Canyon Ridge, is it, I'm not hearing, will it address their pressure issues, or is it just less red tape for them when they do have issues? Or
well, it's less red tape, but I think ultimately it will deal with their pressure issues because right now, Waleska's only concern about water pressure is at the meter at the entrance to Canyon Ridge, which serves the city, because we're their customer. They have to meet a certain water pressure at that meter, and that's the only place they have to meet that pressure. If our meter's not there and now they are serving water to that entire neighborhood, it will be their responsibility to make sure every home in that neighborhood gets the proper pressure in their water. And that's difficult for us as a city because we don't control what's coming into that neighborhood. We're just billing for it, basically. So it will provide those residents, in my opinion, with a little bit more clout when they have a discussion on water, because they'll be speaking to the group that's actually providing the water to them. We'll cut out the middleman, so to speak.
Okay. Ms. Wilson, do you have a question?
Mr. Mayor, I noticed on the agenda it says discussion and possible action on this exchange. I'd like to make a motion that we go ahead with the territorial exchange for water service area, particularly due to the fact that the water meters will be exchanged and we're not going to have to buy new water meters like we had originally thought we would. So I make a motion that we move forward.
Okay.
If I could hop in for just a second. When we were putting the agenda together, what I'm really looking for on action is not an approval for the territorial exchange, but more of an approval for us to continue with the process. We will have to have maps created. We'll have to go through the process of amending our current agreement with the city of Waleska, which needs to be amended anyways as part of service delivery. It just lets us know when we're putting this together that council supports us making that swap as part of that new agreement.
Okay.
And hearing that, I changed my motion to be that the staff move forward in making all the arrangements for this exchange.
Okay. A motion from Ms. Wilson to keep moving forward in this direction, exploring this. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Second from Mr. Tolan. Any other questions or discussion? So all members in favor say aye. Sorry, Ms. McGrew.
Aye.
Ms. Wilson.
Aye.
Mr. Tolan.
Aye.
Mr. Estes.
Aye.
Ms. Schmidt.
Aye.
All members voted for the motion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving forward to new business. Item A, discussion and street acceptance for city maintenance for River Green, Chestnut Glen, Pod A3, Phase 3. Development Services Manager Bethany Watson.
Thank you, Mayor. River Green, Chestnut Glen, Pod A3, Phase 3 has been inspected by city staff and has met the requirements of the Unified Development Code. This pod is ready for acceptance by the city for maintenance. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Ms. Watson, are all the so is all the homes in that pod, are they completed? I mean,
Yes, sir.
okay. So there wouldn't be any additional construction traffic?
No.
Okay. Any other questions for Ms. Watson on that? So I assume we'll be taking a vote on that at the next meeting. Ms. McGrew. Ms. McGrew? You're muted.
She said, hold on.
I said, oh. The little menu at the bottom kept flopping. I couldn't get it. No. These roads, do they need a top coating, and how soon would that be done?
The top coat is in.
Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome.
So we would just be accepting them for city streets and for future maintenance, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Isn't that nice for council to hear that the road
Yay!
coated? Yay!
Unbelievable.
We'll be, yeah, we loved hearing that. So thank you. Any other questions? Okay. So item B, discussion on 471 East Marietta Street slope easement and landscaping. Again, Ms. Watson.
Thank you, Mayor. As you all are aware of the new townhome development on the corner of West and East Marietta Street, the plans for this development are currently in design, and some stormwater issues and tree problems have become arisen from this project on city property. The developer is proposing a slope easement on the city property to allow him to control the water from the city property on the city property and connect into the storm drainage of the developer's property. The other slope easement that developer is requesting would allow the developer to remove the kudzu on the city property to plant new trees. These trees would be the ones that are required due to the trees that he would be taking down on his the developer's property. I did place in your packets a letter from the developer as well as some photos of the area in question, and I'd be happy to answer any questions y'all may have about what the developer is proposing.
And Ms. Watson, do you, trying to see, are there any staff recommendations?
I didn't put any on for this particular meeting, but I think that it's probably a good idea to at least do the stormwater control, because there, as you can see from the pictures, there is some major issues with not only the stormwater but trees that would be hovering over the proposed townhomes.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be my recommendation to approve that portion of this slope easement. I don't have I guess as far as removing the kudzu, there can be problems with that. For one thing, it could cause erosion problems on that slope. We don't know what it looks like underneath there, and it could be a nightmare we don't want to deal with, but it also would beautify that area below the city's stormwater maintenance pond.
Could we require the kudzu being replaced with something else for?
Sure. I mean, we could require that the developer, when the kudzu is removed, if it appears that the slope is in disrepair, that he repairs the slope as well.
Right. So if they want to take that liability on themselves to remove it, that could be a condition that they would have to repair it if it is damaged.
Yes, sir.
And I would just mention too that you have to recall on this particular site, given the age of the homes that were there, the developer is having to take out a number of very mature trees. And these are trees that would likely have health issues in future years. I know maybe 2 years ago, we had a huge limb that came down off one of the trees and ended up blocking the road. And it took us several hours to get rid of that particular tree. So the developer from that standpoint is a little bit penalized because he's asked to put in trees based on the tree count of what's there. And some of these trees are, like we say, massive trees. But I agree with Bethany that, if we have a stormwater erosion issue on the back of the city property that we've never really been aware of based on what's been there, and now we're aware of it, and the developer's willing to fix that as part of his development of that site, that's really a good move for the city from that standpoint.
Right. So if we grant an easement, I mean, they're responsible for ongoing maintenance for that, right?
We could definitely make that part of the agreement that they would be responsible for any maintenance. I think their plan is to have a pretty low to no maintenance solution, but we could make that part of the agreement that if there is a problem that they would take control of it.
Yeah, I think it may be a good idea just because, I mean, I know it can be greatly improved. I mean, I know we all love our kudzu, but you don't know what's under there. So I think if we are going to grant them an easement, I think that's only fair that we would ask them to, maintain it or repair it if there is damage once it's removed. So,
sure.
Mr. Dolan, did you have a question?
I did. I would just ask that some sort of provision or language be included that would state that not only would they make the necessary repairs, but they would put in an erosion preventing plant or plants or whatever, anything that's not kudzu that would aid in the mitigation of further erosion.
Sure.
Okay. Mr. Dyer.
Well, Ms. McGrew had her hand up before.
Okay, Ms. McGrew.
Well, I've been looking at our landscape palette, and on this palette, we have some invasive species, some non-native species. So I would like to get that looked at and amend our landscape palette and ask the developer if they would consider using the non-invasive and native plants until we finalize this landscape palette. And of course, since it's not been accepted at this point, they wouldn't be under obligation, I'm sure. But if we could ask them if they would consider it, I'd be appreciative.
Yes, ma'am. I believe that they would be willing to put in anything that we would request.
Okay. Also, Mr. Grant, kudzu blooms in August. The blooms smell like grape Kool-Aid, and you can use them to make jelly.
Okay. We'll look forward to your jelly making skills, Ms. McGrew. Okay, Mr. Dyer.
Yeah, I wanted to just, I guess, raise one issue. If we're thinking of ongoing maintenance in the future, the developer will be out of the picture. So that will be a little problematic. So we would need to structure it where they put in place whatever it is we want them to do. And I think practically we would have to maintain the city property after that.
I believe it was planning to put a homeowners association in for those townhomes. So it may be something that could be worked out in covenant as well.
And then, yes, if there's going to be an association we can deal with, that would be fine.
Right.
That's correct.
My point was just that, the current solution is good, but if it creates an ongoing situation, then if we don't have a problem right now because the kudzu is there, even though it's a nuisance, then if it creates a problem by removing it, that should be the developer's issue to solve. So, but I think if we could look at that, it'd be great. But it's a good point, Mr. Dyer. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. So the next item C, discussion of ordinance amendment to allow package sales of beer and wine by restaurants. Mr. Dyer.
Yes, so upon your direction, I prepared this ordinance. And as I started to do it, of course, I thought of all the questions I should have asked at the meeting. But this one is prepared, which would allow the sale of beer and wine in connection with the sale of a takeout meal. You wouldn't have to necessarily restrict it to that, but that was one of the things I thought of. So A was changed from the current ordinance to allow that. B was a reference to the growler store regulations. So where it says it doesn't apply to retail package stores that can sell for consumption, with the growler store permission that we gave to sell by the drink and by the package.
So you, so the way you have it currently written, to purchase beer or wine to go from a restaurant, you would also have to purchase a food order to go, right?
Correct. And that really was just, it came to mind because actually I've had a couple of people ask me what was the point of the ordinance to begin with, prohibiting it. And I think that the prohibition is, again, we want alcohol to be sold in conjunction with restaurants. And so you wouldn't necessarily want them to have a big convenience store type cooler for people to pop in and buy a 6-pack. So if you've made it in conjunction with the sale of food, that would presumably prohibit that.
Right. I mean, I know there's been discussions about, business models changing for restaurants going forward, and, some mixture of grocery and and restaurant may be required. But I mean, it's the beauty of ordinances that they can always be updated as conditions, apply. And I think this is a prime example of being able to update it, help our restaurants. But I mean, right now, someone can get a to-go order and then stop by, Publix or, even a convenience store and buy beer or wine. And if that sale can go to our local restaurants, you know, and also for our citizens that wouldn't have to make 2 stops and just 1, because convenience, you know, just it makes a lot of sense. And I've heard from a lot of our restaurant owners that really appreciate that and appreciate the gestures. And a lot of citizens too is like that's great. It's going to save me time. Maybe not necessarily money, but but.
Well, just so you know, I did also prepare a draft that didn't require food sales. It just changed it and allowed it. So whatever the council desires on that.
He's already had 2 people contact him. One of them was 3 for gifts.
Yeah. Ms. Schmidt, did you have a comment?
Well, I was just going to say, I think if the idea is to help restaurants drive sales, then the requirement that you have to buy at least 1 meal or food to go along with it only makes sense.
Right.
They're not gonna, it's not really going to help them out if all I do is go buy a bottle of wine from the restaurant.
Right. I think it does encourage both. And again, I think if business models substantially change going forward, we could always review it again. But I think that was the intent that we were talking about. It was, you know, the intent, what we've done the past, you know, couple of months. So I'm okay with that if everyone else is. But one question I had is that I guess is this considered the first reading of this amendment?
Yeah, so you could take action at the next meeting.
At the next meeting. So the next meeting is June 18th, I think is correct. My current executive order, I think, goes through June 15th for allowing that. So there'd be a lag, I think, of 3 days if we did approve that. I assume I could, I think we're all in favor of this, that I could just extend that for 3 days just to be official if we.
Yes, or we could just direct no enforcement for 3 days.
Okay.
I think we did the June 15th because that was based on the city's declaration of an emergency. So then if we had to extend it, we'd have to extend the declaration.
Right. Okay.
Probably better just not to enforce those 3 days.
Okay. That makes sense. So, okay. Any other questions? Moving right along, item D, discussion of election timeline to hold a special called election to fill vacant Ward 2 council seat. City Clerk Annie Fortner.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. The timeline that was given in the memo, it lists the very last date that each of these tasks can be completed. Some of the tasks are able to be done ahead of this timeline. For example, council could hold a special called meeting, say on like July 15th, to call a special election to fill the vacancy that we have in Ward 2. But you could not hold a meeting to do so after July 30th. Same thing with like the ad being sent to Cherokee County and so forth. Some of these dates on the timeline may be changed slightly depending on deadlines given from the Cherokee County Elections Office. I should be getting that information sometime after June 9th, and I can pass that along once I receive it. In order for Cherokee County to hold the election, the intergovernmental agreement between the city and the elections office must be approved by council. As it states in the memo, staff is estimating that on the low end, the election would cost the city approximately $16,000 to $20,000. The other option given to fill that vacancy in Ward 2 would be to appoint a council member on or after the January 7th council meeting. This is allowed under section 5.14 in the charter, which states that council can appoint a successor for the remainder of the term, provided that the term is within 12 months of expiration. That's sort of the options we have.
So what we're looking at, if we did decide to call the election for this seat, which would have a 1-year term for the election, this person would have to run again. it would cost us a minimum of $16,000, as much as $20,000, when in 30 days or so, we could appoint someone without that cost or expenditure. I guess we also would have the option of not appointing someone for that year. I'm not sure. I mean, I know there's been some questions about representation, in Ward 2. And I think, we've discussed, and I've discussed that with a couple of people, that, that Ward 2 is certainly, like, I think 1/5 the size of the other two wards. And I know we qualify by wards, but we are elected by every citizen. So we serve every citizen. I don't necessarily see it. I would see it differently if we were elected by wards. I would see that there's lack of representation there. I mean, and also the mayor's from Ward 2, and I don't think my constituents have stopped calling me any less since I moved into the new role. But I mean, all that is just for discussion. I'm not advocating either way. The cost of this special election, though, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Fortner or Mr. Peppers, is that because it is a presidential election, that is part of the reason that it's costing more, and because of our existing or our former IGA, we, even for that, just that one seat for that 1 year, would we be paying for like half of that total election cost? Or
So we pay for half of each of the precincts that the city has, and that's half regardless of the number of city residents that live in that precinct. And so you also had to pay ballot preparation for each person who could vote in that precinct. All of those individuals who signed up for absentee mail ballots in the primary were also given the ability to sign up for absentee mail ballots in the general election. And so the county elections office already knows that there will be more invested in the next election based on those absentee mail-in ballots. The other thing is we don't have a current agreement with them. And they've basically said when we do another agreement, the fees will be higher even than what they have projected with the last agreement that we did not take.
right. So I think there's some issues with like the agreement, and do we want to negotiate the same agreement, especially if we know it's going to cost us more? I think we've discussed, what it would take if the city did their own elections. I mean, I think there are issues there, but that is a possibility. And if we did it, in one and just had one precinct at City Hall, I mean, I think that is manageable. I mean, we do have options there. I mean, I think it's what council prefers. And I do want to kind of go back, and this is my understanding, and Ms. Fortner or Mr. Peppers, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but to have called the election for what was supposed to be in March, which is now June, I guess. But it's all confusing. So none of this has helped this situation anyway. But if it would have been the March primary, we would have had called the election back in December. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So, and then the March got rolled into May, which is now June. So that would have prohibited us from doing that. So November would be the first, time that we could actually, this council could call for that election. So we are faced with that option. Do we want to pay for that, basically that election for that seat? I mean, so I think there are a lot of considerations there. So I think Mr. Estes had his hand up first, and I'll.
Thank you. I think, it comes down to the cost, barring, I have not heard any feedback from any constituents personally about the lack of support or the need for us to hold or to fill the vacancy. I get concerned about rushing into an intergovernmental agreement with the elections office, knowing that it's one seat in a major race and probably the most expensive one that could occur. So I think you kind of reiterated my points as well. If you wait a month, you could fill it and have representation. The challenge is that it's not elected by the people at that point. You know, it's appointed. The way it's still for a year. So, you know, I keep my eyes and ears open to hear from constituents to see if there are any concerns, but that's just my points.
Right. And I do think it's also, it should be noted that when Mr. Tolan ran for his seat in Ward 2, and it's probably just because he's so amazing that, helps, qualify for Ward 2. Again, it is a smaller ward, but again, I think all that just is a factor. But like you say, it would be, if it's appointed, I mean, I think it is a viable, fact that it's not elected by the citizens. Of course, the citizens would have, within a year, have he's providing the mood music there. So, but I think to that to that concern, I suppose this is a viable option. I don't know of that we not appoint one and just leave the seat vacant to the next election, because I think there's also some discussion about we know the wards need to be redrawn, redistricting, which that would make sense after the census. Which could that be done by the next election cycle, 2021?
It'll be tight. It'll all be based on census and what they come out with. And as you all know, I think they're having difficulties right now. So, I don't know that we would have it by the next election. One thing I know that, Annie and Lou Stewart and I had a conversation about this at one point. One option the council could take is to say, look, we can do an election and we can invest the money in it. Or if you'll bear with us, we'll do an appointment, but let's have an application process. And if you're somebody who lives in that ward and you meet the criteria to be eligible to run, apply. And we invite you to come to a council meeting, and we'll give you 3 minutes in public input to tell us why you would be good to serve on the council. And if the public wants to come and comment at the next public meeting about it, that's a pretty public appointment process. And it gives you an opportunity to know who might be willing to fill that seat.
I think that's great idea and concept. I mean, I think if there are any concerns that this council or this mayor or anyone has someone in mind, magic person in mind for that seat, that I'll just be on record that is not the case. But Miss Schmidt, I think you had your hand up first, and I'll get to the others here.
Well, I just wondered, all those are good ideas and good points, but I just wondered, so we have all the information. Is it an option? I heard you guys mention having just this city election, possibly just at City Hall, which is convenient because of Ward 2. And how much does that cost, and what are the dates? Is there a timeline that we could pull that off that's not November?
We would still have to have the election in November.
Oh.
We could, I believe, Annie, reach out to the county and say, no, we want to have our election just at City Hall for our city precinct. The problem with that is everybody in the city who wanted to vote in the city election would come to City Hall to vote for that one race, and then have to go and vote at their other precinct for the other elections. So it's a little different when you're the only race versus when you're a special election on somebody else's election.
And I think Ms. Schmidt, what I was saying there is that if we're considering renewing the IGA for the county to run our elections, perhaps we should consider what it would take for the city to run the city elections at one precinct at City Hall. I think we've had some issues with other precincts for city seats, at some of the other locations, but because of the size of the city, I mean, could we streamline it? We've had some conversations about what that would take. I mean, I think that's a possibility. We could not do that by November, but by the next election cycle, could that be something?
That would be something we could possibly make happen by November of 21. The other issue that you have in there is you have to have so many qualified staff members to run an election, and trying to get courses in right now to qualify is very difficult.
Again, current situation just kind of complicates everything. It's just layer complications. And so, again, I'm open to whatever council, and this is just discussion, and we can make some decisions, at the next meeting if you guys are ready. But I want to consider all of our options carefully, and I think money is an issue, but it's not, it doesn't have to be the most important issue, but I think whatever makes sense. But I think how we run our elections and renewing the agreement and knowing it's, we're being told it's going to be more. I mean, I think those are issues we need to be considering also. So agree, Mr. Estes, like, jumping back into another agreement just for this seat for, a 1-year term. That, to me, it doesn't seem reasonable, but again, I'm open to whatever council wishes. Ms. McGrew.
Thank you. This is a question for Mr. Peppers or Mr. Dyer. Do we pay for the election anyway, the general election or the primaries? Do we contribute financially to those?
You do as a county taxpayer, but not as a city taxpayer.
Okay, so that would be a double taxation for our citizens because they're already paying for the election from their county taxes, and then we would use from general funds their tax money to pay for this election.
Sounds like a service delivery issue.
My other question is, after the election in November 3, right? How soon could we appoint a person?
January 7th.
January 7th. So a new council member wouldn't take effect until January anyway. So we could save the money by appointing them and ask our constituents what they have to say, and then we can make our decision from our judgment. But I'm not opposed to an appointment because a person wouldn't take effect until January 7th anyway.
So Ms. McGrew, if we had a special election in November, the winner of that election could take office immediately. The only thing that would stop that from happening is if you had more than one person run for that seat and you had a runoff, and the runoff was in December. And so then you're talking about days between the new person taking office and an appointment in January. But if there is in November, the one who won would take office at the next available council meeting after the election's been certified.
Thank you. I did not realize that.
Ms. Wilson?
Whenever the seat was vacated, council had then said we would not have a special election, and we would have the election in November. We said that. I don't want to go back on that. I'm not in favor of appointing anyone. I'm in favor of having an election, particularly if we can have our own election at City Hall. I think the people of Canton are certainly able to, probably most of them vote in the county election early anyway, and they can vote early and then come to City Hall and vote. I just feel like we need to stand by what we said we would do. And we said we would have an election for the open council seat in November.
Ms. Wilson, if I could clarify one thing. if we are able to only have City Hall as a precinct,
Right.
voters who vote by absentee ballot, voters that vote by mail-in ballot, in early or advanced voting could vote in the city election at the same location as the county election, because all of that is held at the county election facility. The only day that voters might have to go to two different spots would be actually on election day when we go out to precincts.
Right.
I did want to clarify that. Thank you.
That doesn't bother me at all. I think people could do that. And I really felt like that we should, I just don't think we should go back on what we said we were going to do. That's exactly how I feel about it. And y'all remember, we said we were going to have an election for that open seat in November when we put it off the time before.
Thank you. And I actually believe it was, we said March or the next election cycle, but as I pointed out, I don't think it would called it would have had been called in December, and that didn't happen for whatever reason. But and again, because March got moved to May, and I mean, all the stuff, November would be the first time we could do it. Ms. Schmidt.
Right.
Well, I just wanted to clarify. I think when we had the discussions about when we would have an election for this seat, we also thought there would be cooperation and a working agreement on SDS. I don't think that doesn't exist. So, I mean, that's a huge variable. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Well, I don't think does SDS have anything to do with us having an election in November? If we had it at City Hall?
We would still have to enter into an agreement with the elections office to host the election for us. We don't have the capability and won't have the capability before November to host our own election. So we'll have to have IGA with the elections office.
Right. IGA is different from SDS.
Well, an IGA is part of the SDS.
That's not the whole thing.
It wouldn't be the whole thing. We would just have to, whatever agreement we draft would just have to be included in the agreements listed in the service delivery strategy.
When we pass that, this would just be one part.
Yes, ma'am.
Are those agreements typically a one-year agreement or multi-year?
They kind of run election by election. I mean, you can get out of it anytime you want.
Okay.
But I would say this, based on experience with the other cities, it's not really negotiable.
Right.
The county is pretty much just saying take it or leave it at half the cost.
Right.
Because some of the other cities have asked for proportional cost based at number of city residents or city voters, and the county's just not willing to do that.
Well, I think we have the reason we exist because people vote us into office, and I just feel like we need to give our constituents that opportunity.
Are there any other cities? Does Woodstock conduct their own elections, or does Cherokee County conduct all elections for all cities? Or
Cherokee County conducts the elections for all the cities. Woodstock does only have one precinct, so they have what we were discussing earlier. Woodstock, however, is gone before the legislature to ask that their elections also be tied into the same year as general elections for the county. And to do that, that means they're going from 4-year terms to 5-year terms for two different elections so that they can get on the same cycle with the county. There are still some cities in the state of Georgia that do their own elections. There are still some cities in the state of Georgia that do their own elections and only by paper ballots. So, what we would have to do is, if that's the route we want to go, we're going to have to do some serious research and try to put together that. Now, one thing that you can also consider is that if you call the election and only one person qualifies, then there is no election cost, because technically at that point, you don't have to have an election.
Ms. Schmidt, I think you had your hand up first.
I just wanted to clarify again. So this seat is up for election again in November of 2021. Is that correct?
Mhm.
So we would be asking our constituents to pay possibly $20,000 or more for a year or less for this candidate. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, I just want to make sure I understood that.
Yeah. So I think, I mean, we discussed several options here and maybe between now and the next meeting. And I guess, Ms. Ford, did you say it would be by July?
Yes, the last date that council could call a special called meeting to be able to call a special election for the November 3rd general election, that last day would be July 30th.
Okay. So it's possible, I mean,
You could do it earlier,
yeah,
but no later than that, because then the ad to be able to run for the special election has to be sent to Cherokee Tribune by July 31st in order to run by the deadline.
my point was if we didn't come to consensus by the next meeting in June, we still had time to do that, correct?
You would need to have the agreement with Cherokee County to hold the elections for us on the agenda for July for approval, so that one, you've got somebody who can do your election and call the election near about the same time.
Right. And they've said they're not even going to talk to us until after this election is over, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Ms. Wilson? Yeah.
So I believe does Lou, is she credentialed to do elections? Lou.
I do not believe she could do our election for us this year. No.
I mean, we have a lot of things to consider, and time is time, money, and then, the election itself. So I don't know if we kind of outline this separate paths we talked about and what, discuss what is feasible, what is not, and kind of narrow it down to those options. And I mean, if we do have to start negotiating IGA with the county, I imagine that will take some time. So some of these things are going to be predicated by time. And then, the council's just going to have to make a decision and vote on which way they want to go. And I'm okay with whatever they decide. So,
Right.
But we had on tonight to discuss that and just bring it up in the timelines of what we're looking at, and that's just where we are because of everything that has transpired. So that really a lot of it's been out of our control. So. Okay. Any other questions, comments? Thank you. And moving on to item E, discussion of contract extension for Rushton and Company. Ms. Forrester, I know that Mr. Pilgrim presented the letter. Do we need to discuss that further?
This is just something we'd like to present to council, is the possibility of extending the contract an additional 3 years. That would put our total number of years with the Rushton and Company auditors at 9 years. And we would like to make the suggestion to continue the contract, but if council would prefer to have that audit contract go out to bid, we'll pursue that option as well.
Okay. Ms. Wilson?
Melissa, what is the difference in the cost for this year? I saw that it was $36,500 for the next 3 years. What is the difference from the cost for this year? Did it go up for next year in the next 3 years?
The price did increase a little more than $1,800 per year, so that's just about a 5% increase. And that's locked in for the next 3 years.
Right. I noticed that it was locked in for the next 3 years, but so it would only go up 1,800 from this year to the next 3 years.
Correct.
Okay.
And Ms. Forster, hypothetically, if, say we did go out to bid and I know we've worked with this firm for a while, but if we did decide we wanted to go to a new firm, there would be a kind of a learning curve. I mean, potential of costing us more because of that, because they don't know the city or processes or.
That is a potential outcome, that the prices could go up, they could go down. And I don't know how far they would fall.
Right.
But then, yeah, there is a learning curve when new auditors have to get accustomed to every aspect of the city financial process.
Right. And I think your and Mr. Ingham's recommendation, will certainly carries a lot of weight with us. So, and this is something that we can consider at the next meeting, correct? It's not time sensitive.
Yes.
That's correct.
Okay. Mr. Estes?
We could just, as a thought, continue to, they did compliment you and your team on, helping them to be more efficient. So I get that there's cost of living adjustments, and 1,800 isn't a lot, but I don't know, you could go back to them with all the great work and service and support you provide. So a little bit of a thank you there for all your hard work, but also a little bit of a negotiating tact.
I would just mention too that I think it's important for the city, specifically as we're looking to do bonds in the next couple of years, to keep some standard of who our auditors are. I think it raises flags when you change auditors right before you go into some big financial purchase. And we've seen, at least with certain authorities around here, that change auditors frequently, that you do get issues from that. And so, I would suggest that if council does want to move forward with Rushton for 3 more years, that we do so with the understanding with them that at the end of this 9-year period, it probably is a good time to consider proposals from other auditors. But it would also get us through this period where we're going into some significant investment.
That makes sense to me. So, okay. Any questions, comments? Not Mr. Peppers, you're up.
Yes, sir. I have a couple of things. First of all, the paving projects will start in the city on June 15th. The week of June 15th to June 19th, they're going to be paving in Town Mill. And so they are deploying signs, and we're reaching out to the Homeowners Association for that. We'll be in Park Village June 22nd to 26th. That brings up an item that I need to discuss with you. We have talked about in the past, if you recall, Park Village has those 2 private alleyways that are not city streets. So we have no responsibility to pave them. However, those particular alleyways are where we have our water and sewer lines, and also where we service those customers with sanitation. And so one of the things that we could consider doing, and Mr. Dyer's drafted it for us, is to have an access and utility maintenance agreement, which basically states that they will provide an easement to the city to be able to use those alleys for access for those utility services. In exchange, we would top coat those roadways for them instead of paying cash for that easement. If that's something that council is willing to consider, I would like to move forward and go ahead and get with the HOA and see if we can get an agreement in place so that when paving starts out there later this month, Bartow could go ahead and do those alleyways at the same time, so that we don't have to remobilize in that particular neighborhood. I believe the cost was somewhere around, I'm going to say $35,000. I don't have the figure right in front of me, but that's about the ballpark of what it was to do those particular alleys. And given if we had to go in and buy an easement back at a later date, we'd probably invest that much anyways.
Is that a one-time top coat, Mr. Peppers?
It is a one-time, and they're made aware in the agreement that maintenance is their responsibility thereafter.
Okay. Ms. Wilson?
This group, this homeowners association has been asking us for at least a couple of years that I'm familiar with to do this for them. And so I applaud Mr. Peppers for coming up with a solution to this. I will also point out that the developer left us, we had no bond with the original developer of that development. So I think this is a great solution for them, and I am so in agreement with it.
I tend to agree, Ms. Wilson. So. Any other?
Well, no, what I was going to say, if council doesn't have any issues with that, we'll move forward with getting with the HOA and see if we can get it signed from their end. We can bring it back to you at the next meeting this month for your approval, and that would be in time for us to have everything ready for paving out there later the month.
Okay, great.
Couple of other things. We had a discussion, discussed with some of you. If you'll recall, we had a group that reached out to us about a potential grant for a mini pitch soccer field over in the city. And after further discussion with the group, at one point we were trying to figure out the size of the field and where it would be located and everything. Basically, what we've come up with is at Harmon Field, instead of taking over any of the area where we currently have grass baseball fields to put in a turf soccer field, a small turf soccer field, there is an area in the back which has some existing outdoor batting cages that are currently utilized by Canton Dizzy Dean. Canton Dizzy Dean also got outdoor batting cages at Univetter Field, so they're utilizing those as well. So if we took down those outdoor batting cages at Harmon Field, we would have a location for a mini pitch soccer field that doesn't take away any additional field space. And we've got an area back there where there's some existing light poles, and we could do it. We could have their grant do it in such a way that it adds to that part. We know more about the program now. Ultimately, what they're asking for is for us to provide the space so that they could go after the grant later this month. They would put together the plan for maintenance, and they would help out with the maintenance. Additionally, they would help out with some community classes out there. Mr. Cliff Hamilton, who's the JV soccer coach at Cherokee High School, his comment to me was that most of his athletes on the soccer team live in that area. And so it would be nice for them to have a place where they could go and practice some during non-soccer season, and that they're interested in teaching their brothers and sisters and neighbors in that area how to play soccer. So I feel more comfortable now. The school district's not involved with a grant at all. It would really be the city partnering with groups like Cherokee Impact Soccer. I believe the YMCA would like to do some daytime courses for kids that come during midday out there. But ultimately, it would be a community field first. It would be available to that community first, with sometimes reserved for private leagues to come out and have some use of the fields, but not the majority of time. Yes, ma'am. Yes, Ms.
Who handles the reservations? Is that a city Parks and Rec?
We would, just like we handle the reservation of field space at other parks.
Okay.
And generally, we do that by the season. That way, it's clear moving into the season who has what dates. Cherokee Impact, for instance, when I was having a conversation with them, they said, really what we would be thinking is maybe 1 or 2 nights a week during our season. We would have it a couple of hours for specific things, but that's all we would need it for. So I really think you're probably talking, less than 10% of the hours a week would be programmed, and the rest of it would be basically open free time. Mr. Tolan? You're still muted, Mr. Tolan. I'm sorry.
Absolute magic to my ears. This is really, really good for Canton. This is, if we can make this happen, and Mr. Hamilton and all the stakeholders that are involved in the project and the bid process, which is due June the 30th. These folks are very passionate about the kids in Canton, and particularly those underserved kids. And a partnership with the Atlanta United would go so far in helping promote Canton as a very progressive city. So I was in support of this before, and the fact that now there's a carve out at Harmon Park, it just really demonstrates to me that the city is serious about taking care of our citizens and thinking outside the box. So I appreciate your willingness to listen, and it sounds like we may have turned the corner here. Now the pitch project has to put their money where their mouth is and raise the money and get some of the T's crossed and I's dotted. So thank you for your support of that, Mr. Peppers and Mayor.
And I would mention too that gives us the flexibility with the CDBG funds from the county to do some creative things on the rest of the park out there for the community. We already know that portion of the city loves soccer. We see it every day on Hickory Flat Highway. We see that community walking to Heritage Park. So having some soccer over there is great. It may be that we're able to create some large green space over there for more pickup soccer as well, and kite flying or frisbee throwing or whatever it might be on a generic day, or community events, in that area as well. So we'll be looking at more projects on the CDBG side, but we think having those two things working together will really revitalize that park for that part of the community.
Yeah, I think it's very exciting. I did want to make the point that, if we did get the grant for the pitch field, that'd be above and beyond the CDBG funds. And, I think it's a real testament. We're investing in our citizens, and we're investing in our parks, park space that does need investment. And it fits in with our Marietta Road community initiative. It would fit in with our roadmap process. I think I agree, Mr. Tolan. I think it's a great solution. I'm excited about it as well. So,
remind everybody that the farmers market starts on Saturday. It'll be from 9 to noon. It's over at Brown Park. We've spread out. We've got it's only food and produce vendors, and they've been given many rules and suggestions to be safe, and so we're looking forward to that. And then I would also mention that just as we had the discussion about Park Village and that street, Mr. Dyer has also prepared a document for Sheila Way. Sheila Way is that private street that goes into Norton Lake off of Bell's Ferry. So it's right before you get to the main entrance of Norton Lake. It's a little bit different. It's not an alley that's owned by the homeowners association. It's an easement for basically a cross easement among a number of residents that live in that area. But it's also where our water's located and our sewer's located, and where we provide sanitation service. So what we would do in that particular instance, we would go to each of the homeowners in there and ask them to sign basically an agreement that allows us to maintain our access for our utilities through there in exchange for repairing and top coating the road one time, and then the maintenance falls back to them. And I believe the estimate on that was about $30,000. So it's very similar to this Park Village scenario. We get a number of complaints on that roadway. I don't think the people, when they bought in there, understood that it wasn't a common roadway, but it's clear on the plats it's not. But it would be an opportunity for us to get that permanent easement through there that we need for our water and sewer utility, while also, taking care of that neighborhood at the same time. So we'll be looking into that and making contacts over the next few weeks so that hopefully we can bring a list of those agreements to you in July, the first meeting in July. And then the only thing else I have, and Mr. Ingram is still with us. He's got an item that he would like to mention under the Assistant City Manager report.
Thank you, Mr. Peppers. The Canton, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. The Canton Development Authority has a 2003 bond issue that has an outstanding balance of $795,000. This bond was used to install water and sewer lines up at the bluff when it first started development. And it was written up so that the tap fees would be used to pay that bond off. This was initially a 50-year bond, and we're now approximately 17 years into it. And since tap fees are only used to defease this bond to pay it off, the interest accrues until the city collects a tap fee, and then that tap fee is used to pay off first interest and then principal. So therefore, as of today, the city has paid $450,000 in interest on that bond and only $125,000 in principal. The interest accrues at 3%. Would the city council want to consider paying that issue off? I've had an informal conversation with TPA. TPA is the holder of the bond. I say they could possibly allow the city to take that bond at a slight discount. I haven't really struck up really formal conversation, just enough to maybe see if they have any interest at all.
I think if we get a discount, I mean, so if I understand you correctly, we paid $450,000 in interest on a $795,000 bond.
$459,000 of interest so far on a what was originally a $921,000 bond.
Yeah, we need to do something different there. So.
Yeah, so if the point here is if we can pay it off now, we think the Bluffs development will build out, and I say build out to the point that we can pay these bonds off. Hopefully it'll build out in the next 2 or 3 years, but if it doesn't, that interest just sits there and accrues, and ultimately the city has to pay that bond off anyway.
What funds would we use to pay that off if we did that, Mr. Ingram?
Yes, sir. We would use tap fees because the agreement between the city and the CDA, it does say to use tap fees. So we had essentially used tap fees that we have collected over the past year, 2 years, 3 years to pay that debt off.
There's enough in the fund to do that.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Makes sense to me.
Well, Mr. Peppers, I don't know if we need a formal action on that. I've actually was talking to Ms. Forrester, looking at the policy, and I'm not really sure that I think that may be something that we can do without council. But first of all, we want y'all to know that we want to do this, that this is it. This is of the city's interest. And if y'all bless it and y'all give us formal action, in my opinion, I think that's all the more better.
I would actually feel better if and I know it may not be necessary, but if we actually took a vote on that.
Yes, sir.
Then I would suggest, if it's okay with council, that we do a little bit more legwork over the next couple of weeks with TPA, and bring back an agreement to you at the next meeting for your consideration on approving.
That's what I was going to suggest, and just see what kind of, if we can get a discount, and I mean, just so we know the details of that, but I think it's a wonderful idea.
And one of the reasons why we get such great audits every year is because people like Nathan, they squeeze those pennies just as far as they can. And it's another example of looking at everything and trying to figure out how we can come out better on the back end.
We appreciate it now more than ever. So
absolutely. All right, so I'll strike up some more formal discussions with TPA, and we'll bring something back to you in a couple of weeks. Thank you, Mayor and Council.
Thank you, Mr. Ingram. Let us know how we can help.
Yes, thank you.
And the only other thing that I had to provide to council is just to update you. We have had a couple of applications that have been turned in for permits for peaceful protests. We have one that was turned in for next Friday, the June the 12th, from 4 to 9, I believe it is, out in the Riverstone area. And then we had one that's actually come in during the meeting that I was looking at. That is for tomorrow from 4 to 8:30, I believe, here at City Hall. We've been very lucky so far that all of these groups have been sitting down with us, filling out applications, giving us information, with the understanding that we want people to take advantage of their rights. And if they want to have a peaceful protest, we're happy to be able to support that, making sure that we have what we need from a staff side to be able to make it a safe activity. And also to know that it's going on so that we can continue to make it a safe activity. So I just wanted council to be aware of that. I don't have anything else, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm not aware of any council introduced items, but just wanted to make sure. Anyone have anything? Okay, thank you. I just have a couple of things. This has been on my agenda and list for since the beginning. I've still got a long list we're getting around to, but I think certainly current events makes it even more important. And I've been wanting to appoint a diversity task force for quite some time now, and really just to get community involvement and look at really everything we're doing in the city and just get dialogue going and get advice on our commissions, our boards, and our practices and procedures. And again, I don't know where all it will lead to, but I think it can be productive. And I would like council's participation in that. So I would like to ask by the June 18th meeting if every council member could give me a name, an appointment, someone you would like to appoint to the diversity task force. We'd like to get that up and going. So, and we'll look at that and see. We certainly want to get the city staff and the police department, everyone involved in that, and we'll, once we have that task force together, can sit down and get to work and decide what we need to do, and let that task force tell us, give us their perspective on that. So look forward to getting that up and going. I appreciate your help in getting that. The other thing is the sixth committee, council committee, was a public safety committee, and that is, was going to be assigned to the other Ward 2 council member. And I know we're still discussing how that's going to happen, but I know that I would like to kind of see that we put some thought into this as well. And so I think in the interim, and when that council member is elected or named or appointed or whatever, they will certainly assume the chair of that committee. But I think in the interim, I would like to for us to appoint a citizen committee, public safety committee, and again, they can work with us and the chief if he agrees that would be productive, and just get citizens' input on public safety. And I think most of all, just so again we can kind of just improve communications, all the great things our police department is doing, and our citizens then can go and communicate that to their fellow citizens. Again, help us communicate that throughout the community. I mean, I think communication is always the answer to me. So more is better than less. I don't know what Chief Merrifield thinks about that, but Chief, thoughts on that?
Yes, sir. I absolutely. I mean, as you said, communication is great. I kind of feel like we've had a public safety committee, citizen committee for quite some time with the entire community, right, taking input with the. I agree. with the different things that we've done and the close communications that I've been very fortunate to be able to have with some of our community leaders, especially some of our community leaders in some of our minority areas. So yes, sir. Yeah, I absolutely I can see no wrong that could come from that. It could only be good.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I think just like with the diversity task force, I want us to keep that top of mind in every initiative that we do. So the Public Safety Committee, again, by the next meeting, if you guys can think of an appointment you would like to make to that as well. Ms. Wilson? think you're muted.
Whoops. Now,
There you
the diversity task force, do we know about how long they would serve?
go. We don't, but I think we can get that information together, and we can also, once we have them, on board, we can discuss that with the task force.
Right. Okay. Before, submitting a name, I thought they might want to know how long they'd be expected to serve. So.
Right. At a minimum 1 year, I would say, but we can figure that out. So, Ms. Wilson, Ms. McGrew.
Are you looking for a name from each of us for the task force and then another name for the diversity task force?
Yes, ma'am. Diversity, public safety.
Okay. And are you wanting these names to come from our own ward so that we don't cross wards?
I think that is fine. Yes. I think you're muted again, Ms. McGrew.
Thank you. Do they need to be city residents?
I think.
Yes, it's perfectly fine.
I think a city of Canton address. Now, I'm not hung up on they got to live in the city limits, but they've lived in the city of Canton. I'm okay with that if everyone else is okay with that.
So no LJ, no Woodstock, but
right.
Canton mailing address.
Yes.
Thank you.
If everyone else is okay with that, is that appropriate?
Oof. Then all the Satali folks I don't know. I think you stick with the city residents to keep there's already enough confusion.
I kind of agree with Nick.
Okay.
To keep it city limits.
Okay. Well, let's do that then. I appreciate your feedback.
Also, there's confusion about in public safety, does the sheriff come to my house if I call, or does the Canton Police Department come? So,
right. Yeah, good points. Also, see how flexible I am. So,
I would just mention one caveat to that would be if you wanted to appoint somebody who is a commercial business owner who might not live in the city but owns a business in the city. You get into that sometimes. So that's kind of your other option, so to speak.
Yeah, I would say, live in the city limits or they own a business in the city limits, if everyone's okay with that, because I think we do have a lot of business owners that say they would like a voice. They would like to vote, but they unfortunately can't do that. But Ms. McGrew. You're muted again, Ms. McGrew.
Nabbit, dang nabbit. If we're appointing a person from our ward to these task forces, might the mayor want to be the one who appoints the commercial owners?
I'm going to make appointments as well, and I'll take that in consideration. My goal is really to get the best people on there as possible. So
Right. If the commercial business owners don't live in our wards, you would be a neutral appointer.
Yeah. I'm happy to take that in consideration, Mr. Tolan as well. I mean, we're both in this ward. I think we have Ward 2 certainly has good representation there, but I'll take that in consideration. I'm happy to consider that. So, but if you guys have business members in your ward or whatever, certainly welcome to consider those too. We're looking for the best people on the bus. So, okay. Thank you. That's all I have tonight. And at this point, I will entertain a motion to adjourn to executive session to discuss real estate and litigation.
This is Brooke. Sorry, Sandy.
Who wants to make the motion?
Go ahead, Brooke.
I'll make the motion to adjourn to executive session.
I second.
To discuss?
Oh, sorry. To discuss litigation and
real estate.
Real estate personnel.
Thank you.
So all in favor, say aye. Ms. McGrew?
Aye.
Ms. Wilson?
Aye.
Mr. Tolan? Mr. Tolan?
I think he fell off the call.
I think fell off the call. Mr. Estes,
Aye.
Ms. Smith.
Aye.
Okay. 4 members voted to adjourn. We will now executive session. We won't be coming back online. I don't believe so. Or
Well, that, we need to decide that. There's no reason to come back.
No, there's no reason to come back.
so for those joining us on the live stream, we will not be coming back to entertain you anymore this evening, but thank you for following us. And we are now adjourned to executive session. Good evening.